Picture the year 1200 BC, and honestly, things are going great. Suspiciously great. The kind of great that, in a horror movie, means everyone's about to die. The Eastern Mediterranean is basically the world's fanciest group chat. You've got Egypt, run by pharaohs who genuinely believe they're related to the sun. You've got the Hittites up in modern Turkey, an empire so powerful most people today have never heard of them, which is embarrassing for everyone involved. You've got the Mycenaean Greeks, the guys from the Trojan War, stomping around in bronze armor looking like angry lobsters. Babylon, Assyria, the island of Cyprus, the traders of Ugarit. Everybody who's anybody. And they are all connected. This is the original globalized economy, and it runs on one very stupid, very fragile secret: bronze. Bronze is what everything is made of. Swords, plows, fancy cups, the whole civilization. And bronze is copper plus tin. Copper, fine, you can find that. But tin? Tin is rare. Tin has to be shipped in from ridiculously far away, possibly Afghanistan, on a supply chain so long and delicate that one bad Tuesday could snap it in half. So these kingdoms trade. Constantly. Ships crawl across the sea stuffed with gold, ingots, ivory, ebony, glass, jars of wine, and one guy's slightly cursed collection of hippo teeth. We actually found one of these ships, the Ulubran wreck, and it was carrying goods from like 11 different cultures. 11. That's not a boat, that's a floating international incident. And the kings? They wrote each other letters. Real letters, on clay, that still exist. The pharaoh and the Hittite king call each other brother. They complain about gold. They arrange marriages. One Babylonian king basically writes, "Hey, you got married and didn't invite me, rude." It's group chat energy from 3,000 years ago, petty and gossipy and weirdly relatable. It is a dazzling, sophisticated, interconnected world. Palaces with plumbing. Bureaucrats with filing systems. A civilization that took centuries to build, humming along like it would last forever. It would not last forever. In fact, within about 50 years, nearly every single city you just met is going to be a smoking pile of rubble. And nobody will be entirely sure why. So let's talk about the fire. Because that's the thing about the late Bronze Age collapse. It wasn't a slow, dignified decline where everybody gradually got a little poorer and moved to the suburbs. No. It was cities. Burning. One after another. Like someone was working their way down a checklist with a torch and a grudge. Hattusa, the mighty Hittite capital, the whole beating heart of an empire. Torched and abandoned. Just gone. Mycenae, home of those Greeks you know from the Trojan War, the palaces with the golden masks. Burned. Pylos, Tiryns, Troy, city after city all across the Eastern Mediterranean, boom, 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 going up like dominoes made of thatch. Layers of ash in the archaeology so thick you can basically read them like a very depressing calendar. And here's the genuinely eerie part. These people saw it coming. And they wrote it down. At Ugarit, a wealthy, cosmopolitan port city on the coast of modern Syria, we found clay tablets. Actual letters. And they are not fun beach reads. One of them, from the last king of Ugarit, is basically a full-blown panic text. He writes to a neighboring king saying, "Hey, enemy ships showed up, they set fire to my cities, they did horrible things, and by the way my own army is off in Hittite territory and my navy is parked in another country entirely. So the city is, and I'm paraphrasing, extremely defenseless right now." And then nothing. Because that letter was found still sitting in the kiln, unbaked, unsent. The city fell before they could hit send. Which means the last thing anybody at Ugarit did was write a cry for help that never left the building. Ugarit was never inhabited again. That's it. Roll credits. The letters all say the same haunting thing, over and over. Ships. Ships on the horizon. Enemies coming from the sea. Nobody names a country. Nobody names a king. There's no, "we were conquered by the kingdom of Steve." Just this vague, gathering dread of people arriving by boat and everything ending shortly after. An entire interconnected world, palaces and plumbing and gossipy pen pal pharaohs, was being systematically erased. And the survivors couldn't even tell you who was doing it. So who was? Here's where it gets frustrating, because the guy who finally names names is not exactly a neutral source. Enter Ramesses III, pharaoh of Egypt, who around 1177 BC carved a giant brag wall onto his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. And on this wall, in enormous, "Look what I did," hieroglyphics, he describes fighting off a coalition of invaders and, crucially, he lists them. The Peleset, the Shardana, the Shikalesh, the Denyen, the Weshish. It reads like a fantasy football roster nobody can pronounce. He also gives us a picture. Literally. The carvings show a chaotic sea battle, plus something that changes the whole story: ox carts. Wagons piled with women, children, and household junk, rumbling along overland. These are not raiders popping in for a smash and grab. These are entire families packing the minivan and leaving forever. And that's the twist. Because for 100 years everyone imagined the Sea Peoples as one terrifying navy of mystery Vikings. But the evidence looks less like an invasion and more like a stampede. A mob of displaced, desperate people fleeing something worse than themselves. So what were they fleeing? Take your pick, because the answer is apparently, all of it, at once. There's serious evidence for a brutal, decades-long drought, courtesy of pollen samples and tree rings that basically say, nobody ate for a while. There were earthquakes, a whole cluster of them, an earthquake storm, that cheerfully knocked palaces over across the region. And once the crops failed and the walls fell, you get famine, then unrest, then people abandoning their homes and moving, en masse, toward anywhere that still had food. Which means the Sea Peoples might not have been villains so much as symptoms. The refugee wave of a collapsing world, bumping into other collapsing places and knocking them down like the world's saddest game of dominoes. Victims of the apocalypse who then, out of pure hunger, became the apocalypse for somebody else. Even the name is a fib. Sea Peoples isn't what they called themselves. It's a label a French Egyptologist slapped on them in the 1800s. We invented a spooky team name for a group that may not have been a team at all. So the great enemy that ended the Bronze Age might just be a crowd. And crowds don't leave a return address. So the dust settles, the fires burn out, and everyone takes stock of the new world. And the new world is, technically speaking, a smoking crater. The Hittite Empire? Gone. Just gone. One of the great superpowers of the age, the guys who fought Egypt to a draw at Kadesh, simply stopped existing. Their capital, Hattusa, was abandoned and burned, and nobody bothered to rebuild it. Mycenaean Greece, the civilization that gave us palaces and gold masks and eventually the legends of the Trojan War, collapsed into a bunch of scattered villages squinting at the ruins. And here's the part that really stings. They forgot how to write. I'm serious. The Mycenaeans had a whole writing system called linearby, mostly used by accountants to count sheep and jars of olive oil. When the palaces burned, the accountants were out of a job, and the entire skill just evaporated. Greece went illiterate for roughly 400 years. For centuries of, what's a letter? When the Greeks finally started writing again, they had to borrow an alphabet from the Phoenicians, because their old one was a lost art, like Latin or folding a fitted sheet. This is what historians politely call a dark age. Not because it was spooky, but because the lights of civilization literally went out and nobody was writing anything down to tell us what happened. Cities shrank. Trade routes withered. That gorgeous, glittering group chat from Chapter 1, the tin and the gold and the polite royal letters, all of it went dead silent. No new messages. Everyone left the server. And the lesson, if you want one, is deeply unfun. This wasn't one disaster. It was a hyper-connected world where drought and earthquakes and famine and migration all hit at once, and because everything depended on everything else, one snapped thread unraveled the whole sweater. Efficiency is great right up until it isn't. As for the Sea Peoples themselves, our mystery squad, our faceless crowd of the desperate, we never really found out who they were. No confession, no census, no forwarding address. A few carved names on an Egyptian wall and a whole lot of ash. They deleted the Bronze Age and slipped off stage, and 3,000 years later we're still standing in the wreckage going, wait, who did this?